Is the work world confusing? Congested? Are you just trying to find your way? There must be a light at the end of this tunnel. Well, there's a way to find your calling, to find that job you want and deserve, when someone will come up to you and say, "You're hired." Hi, I'm Steve Piazzali, a career and life coach, and welcome to Your Hired, a show about jobs and careers in which we answer questions such as, how do I find work that makes me come alive? How do I get that job I want and deserve? How do I improve my negotiation skills? Well, we're going to find out about these and other issues by asking guests who are interesting and knowledgeable these kinds of questions, and we certainly have one today. Before I introduce them, though, I'd like to invite you to check out my website where you'll find the 12 keys to getting a great job, sign up for the free career newsletter, watch prior episodes of the show, and this show will be up there as well, as find out about the career coaching I do. And essentially what I do is work with people one-on-one to help them get unstuck, define their goals, and reach them faster than they would on their own. That information is all at www.bayareacareercoach.com. That's www.bayareacareercoach.com. Well, we're really pleased to welcome Scott Landstrom on the show, and he's done so much. I've got to read this to make sure I get it right. He's the CEO of Direct Grid Technologies and an expert job negotiation advisor. He's held a number of senior executive positions in semiconductor-related firms, ranging from startup CEO to vice president and general manager of several different business units at KLA-Tencor. He's an expert in negotiation, and that's what he's here to talk to us about. Negotiating for job seekers. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Steve.
This is fantastic. So tell us what you do and how you develop this interest, passion, and expertise in negotiation.
Sure. Basically, in my work in the semiconductor equipment world as a senior executive, I was placed in the position of having to negotiate major deals with multi-billion-dollar customers in which the economic value of the transactions was in the $10 to $30 million range. And one of the things you learn is that every dollar that comes off the top line in a negotiation basically comes out of the margin because all of their costs are absorbed. And so the companies that I worked with rapidly figured out that if we could train our people in terms of negotiation skills, we could maximize the profitability of the deals we were involved in. I then transitioned to running merger acquisitions for KLA-Tencor, and now instead of $10 to $30 million, it was $20 to $120 million.
Wow.
And so the sort of economic value that was involved in those negotiations was even higher. And over time, I've been retained, even though I'm a full-time CEO of a solar company, I've maintained a small part of my budget to help companies and individuals with trying to coach them on how to effectively negotiate to make sure that they maximize their possibilities.
So if some of our viewers are stuck, they know who to call on, right?
Right.
Okay. So what you did is you brought along a graphic, it's a simplified graphic, but it's the 4 aspects of negotiating skills for job seekers, and I thought we would show the basic 4 areas and
Sure.
discuss them at length because there's a lot of good information in them. So I've got my little cheat sheet here. The first negotiation skill for job seekers is negotiating for a seat at the table. You say you must get in the batter's box before you can hit the ball. Tell us about that.
Well, I think a lot of people view the interviewing process as a sales process, almost a unilateral projection of value. And I don't view it that way at all. I believe that there are a number of constraints and interactive value exchanges that occur that affect, first of all, whether you can even get into the office. And secondly, if you do get into the office and you do get an offer, what that offer might look like. So the difference between a sales process and a negotiation process is a negotiation process involves a bilateral exchange. And I think that most people don't really take the time to recognize that, and so therefore they're not positively positioning themselves in a bilateral fashion to make sure that they're, number one, differentiating themselves all along, number two, that they're going after the right opportunities, and number three, that they're positioning themselves in a way that if they do get that opportunity landed, that it comes through at the highest value for them.
So now, I think in the more detailed slides that you made me privy to earlier, that there were some unconventional ways that a person could differentiate themselves?
Sure. Yeah. You know, in a previous life, I ran a opto-telecom contract manufacturing company that had 8 factories in Canada, U.S., and Mexico, and 2,400 employees. And we opened up a position for the senior vice president of marketing. And we had a flood of resumes that came through conventional channels. And we had one individual that had read the announcement of my hiring at the company as president and wrote a congratulatory letter to me individually with specific remarks about the history of the company and the challenges that I faced in my role, with no reference to his interest in the job. And it finished with, if you can use some help in marketing, please give me a call.
Wow.
And I thought that so caught my attention that I ended up actually hiring the guy for senior VP of marketing. So it sort of highlighted the ability to differentiate yourself in advance of actually getting in the door to maximize the chance of doing just that.
Now, is that a bit risky? I mean, this is a sort of a side question, to try to anticipate the needs of the company that you're going to work for and be bold. Some of my clients have asked me this, so maybe you can respond to it, whether you take the bold step of saying, I've recognized that you have this problem, here is an idea that I had, or is that risky in differentiating yourself by trying to show your ideas without fully knowing what's going on inside the company?
Yeah, you raise a good point, Steve. You don't want to pretend that you know more than you do, right? The worst thing that you can have is you walk into the psychologist's office and he says, you're manic depressive, here's what we need to do, and you say, I haven't said a word yet, right? So you don't want to get too prescriptive too early. You know, in this case, what the guy was saying was more historical. It was more backward focused.
Okay.
So it was like, look, here's what I've found through my research that you guys have historically dealt with. Good luck in your. So he wasn't trying to tell me how to do my job. He wasn't trying to jump in and say, I can analyze the marketing challenges you have from 1,000 miles away. He was more saying, I've done my homework. I understand the position that you're coming from, and I feel that these are the key challenges, without being prescriptive in any way.
And his, not aggressiveness, but his taking the chance impressed you as a type of person you'd want to...
It was the only entreaty that I got through that channel,
okay.
right, where somebody was writing. He had included in his letter the newspaper clipping that announced my appointment as president. So it was clearly...
Smart cookie.
It's smart cookie, absolutely. So in this case, you know, he was negotiating for a seat at the table, and he was doing a very effective job of doing that through both A, differentiating his resume from everyone else's in terms of the way that he came at me, and B, showing that he had done the work. He was willing to do the work to at least present some level of analytical background that he had gathered through his research.
Okay. Anything else on this point, or should we go on to hero and villain, or anything else?
No, I think there's a couple other points. I think that in terms of negotiating for a seat at the table, I think there's a chance to custom tune your CV, that your resume doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all instrument. And I think that the way to look at this is it's like a person, either a male wearing a suit or a casual attire, or a woman wearing a party dress or a business attire. There's a number of ways to dress up the same person, and without changing the substance of that person, change the look of it. And I think people need to understand that you can change your CV not in terms of changing the substance of it, but changing the emphasis of it in a way that can maximize your chance of getting in that front door.
And the same thing with the cover letter, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. The second point you have is negotiating. And by the way, if you think of other things, just put them in there. But negotiating with yourself, both hero and villain, which I'm really curious what that is, managing expectations, behaviors, and the pre-interview mindset. Tell us about that. What's this hero and villain?
So, we've all heard the proverb, we have met the enemy and he is us, right?
Yeah.
And I have probably in my executive career, I've probably interviewed 250 executives and senior executives for positions that I was hiring for. And it's interesting that in cases where people have been on the job market for a while, very often they've suffered whether it's real or imagined, they've suffered these emotional setbacks in the fact that they haven't landed those jobs.
Right.
And sometimes they walk into the room and you can just see their shoulders slumping, right? And you're like, my God, I feel for you, right? On one hand, your heart goes out for them. On the other hand, this is not a charity project, right? And so they're damaging themselves in terms of their chances of landing that job. And so one of the things I try to tell people is to take whatever frustrations, whatever non-fits, I don't want to call them failures because I don't necessarily think that they're failures, but whatever interview processes that they've been through that have not resulted in jobs, and set that aside and put that in a compartment in their mind where they say, that's that. This is a different opportunity with a different set of requirements, with a different set of individuals, with a different set of personality matches. And if I carry any of that baggage into the room, I'm damaging my chance. The past affects the future. Right?
I know you're a fellow sports fan, so it's sort of like a defensive back that's gotten burned. He has to have a short memory.
Short memory.
Same thing here. Sort of, I think you call it a tabula rasa, like almost a clean slate. I'm starting again. The baggage, the past is the past. I'm good at what I do, and now I'm going to communicate it.
Winston Churchill once said, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is all we have. And I really feel that that's true in the interview cycle. So I strongly counsel people to let go of any of the past frustrations, any of the past job interviews that didn't work out. Walk into that room with a negotiation with yourself where you convince yourself that you are absolutely the best person for that job, regardless of whether you know or don't know who the competition is.
Yeah, I know in one of your slides you mentioned the PSRs, the success stories people have, and one of the things I try to do with my clients is help revitalize that memory of the things that they've done well, so when they walk in the room they have actual stories that they can communicate that support and they believe in, and that the person listening believe in. So it's sort of like what you're saying is to come across with strength, and maybe having some of those stories is one of the ways to develop it.
Absolutely. Giving a track history of showing them the problem-solving routine and the process and the thought process that went into it and some of the skills that were applied. I mean, in fact, you and I have talked in the past about, you've actually helped emphasize the PSR approach to me, that is very effective in terms of generalizing from a specific situation into an entire skill set.
Right.
The whole problem-solving process. Another thing I think that's very important in terms of negotiating with yourself is getting to a point where you go in as an equal in the interview process.
Tell us more about that. You're interviewing them as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. In fact, when I interview a senior executive, if they don't ask me any questions, if they don't challenge me in some way, I'm disappointed. I'm unimpressed, because I have a good friend of mine who's a 9th degree black belt in New York City. He's the top martial artist in all of New York City. And for his black belt instructors, once a month he straps on the equipment and he fights them. And they have no chance to beat this guy. But what he really wants to know is, will they try? Will they stand up to him? Do they have the intestinal fortitude to at least attempt to do battle with him in a case where they can't possibly win? And in my case, and I think with a lot of hiring managers' cases, you don't want someone that's going to fight with you at the water cooler every day. At the same time, you don't want someone that's going to say yes to every idea you have, right? So you want them to challenge you during the interview. You want them to say, well, that's great, let me answer your question, but then I have a question in return for you.
Which is a good way to be a manager or an executive as well. I forget the term you use for it.
Constructive conflict.
Yes, that's it. I knew it was 2 C's.
Yeah.
Okay. But do you want to say what constructive conflict is, since we just, and by the way, PSRs is problem solution result, which is a success story that goes into your resume. But go ahead, since we tantalize them with these 2 C's here.
So constructive conflict, Intel has they call it constructive confrontation. And really what that is as long as we keep away from personal attacks and emotional outbursts, that we should all be enabled to be able to attack an issue, as long as the issue is at center and we're dealing with data and facts, that we want to encourage people to voice and to surface contrary opinions. And in a meritocracy, in a case where constructive conflict or constructive confrontation is embraced, what that should result in is the best ideas, the cream of the best ideas rising to the top. And so we don't care if that idea came from the janitor or came from the CEO. If everyone's free to voice their alternative opinions, then what that creates is a meritocracy of ideas, and that's really the best that an organization can hope for.
And so you look for a little bit of that in the interview process.
Absolutely.
You want to see a little bit of chutzpah or whatever it is. Or
well,
like
I just want to say 80% of it is going to be me asking that person questions and challenging them. I want them to reach out and say, okay, I've answered your questions. Now here's a challenge I have for you, right? Or here's a criteria that I have for a work environment that I will agree to.
Which makes sense, right? Because as a job seeker, you want to know that you're going to be set up to succeed, that there's something there that you'll have the support of the wherewithal to be able to succeed. So you have to ask some of these questions, right, to find out if it's a good fit for you.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're not asking those questions, you're potentially getting into a situation where you're not going to be happy or successful or self-actualized, once you have the job. And then it's sort of, anybody that views the interview process as a one-way filter, as them accepting me as a job applicant, is not doing themselves a service, because you can get into a job or a culture or a boss that doesn't fit your particular personality and value set and skill set, and then you're looking for a job again 3 to 6 months later. Okay. So
I would move on to the next one, unless you have anything else you wanted to say. Is that
no?
Okay. The next one is negotiating for personal positioning and differentiation, game day tactics, how to put your best self out there, out front.
So we touched on a little bit of this, but I tend to believe in the poker player paradigm, that if a poker player picks up 2 2s in his hand, there's 2 ways that he can handle that. He can visually roll his eyes and be evident to everyone at the table that he's got a bad hand, which is effectively not a very good poker playing strategy. Or he can try to realize that there's substance and there's form, and that substance and form are not innately coupled. And what that means is that a person with 2 2s can act like he's got 4 aces, and a person with 4 aces can act like he's got 2 2s. And so in a negotiating perspective on game day, even if you absolutely have to get this job because the mortgage is late, the worst thing you can possibly do is to lead with that perspective and allow your internal neediness to show through. One of the inherent negotiating pillars is that need is the enemy. If nothing else I say gets remembered today, need is the enemy.
Okay.
And I really believe that the moment any interviewer sees need on the other side, I have to have this job, or I'm going to allow you to see that I have 2 2s in my hand, that a couple things happen. Number one, they lose a little bit of respect for that person because they're allowing that to show through. And if they allow that to show through in a personal interview, might they not allow that to happen in a professional situation once you hire them, where we have an account that we need to land and they allow that to bleed through?
Oh, I see.
The second thing that happens in a negotiation that people need to be aware of is that the price is never fixed. And in this case, the price is what the compensation package they're willing to give you. Well, if you show need, the price just went down because they...
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So...
because you're just easier to get,
you're
more
easier to
desperate.
get. You've already shown that you really, really want this job and you really, really need this job. And so if there's a range that they were thinking about giving you, and that every job I've ever been the interviewer for, there was a range. And if I saw that there was excessive need, that range came down. Conversely, if someone sat there and said, let me show you my skill set, but I'm going to make it very clear that I'm also interviewing you, as we talked about earlier, that I have questions I expect you to answer, And even though it's an 80-20 mix, I still have my 20% that I want to ask you about the company and about your approach, about your management style, about your value system. Then I come away with that person going, you know, that person doesn't need this job. That person left here as an equal in terms of our dialogue, and maybe it's at the upper end of that range that we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually getting into the next question, which is the dance, right? You call it the job package offer dance, triangulation on maximizing while landing the offer. I want to hear what you have to say about that, but you've made me think of something I've heard many times. In fact, I've told people this, so I hope it's not wrong. Should you be a little vague on the actual salary, the compensation you expect? The bromide is the first person to mention specific money loses, in the sense that if I say I must make at least 100,000 to you and you were willing to go to 140, I'll never hear that. Or if you say we can't pay more than 140 and I was willing to be 100, you'll not know that. Do you believe in that, or is there some way to reveal the salary and still keep your negotiating power, or is it better to keep it a little vague?
I think you're right. I think that in negotiation skills training, people learn to listen for the bottom number. So if I'm trying to buy a company in an M&A world and someone says, who's the founder of the company that we're trying to buy, he says, look, we can't let this go for less than 50 to 70 million. I only heard one number. 50. I heard 50, right? So I think when you do put a number out like that, it is very difficult. However, I also recognize that certain interview styles will really drive toward historical compensation. And it's, you know, you have to either refuse to answer or you have to lie, and I don't recommend either of those, right? So I think in a condition where you can be vague about the compensation, I think that you're right, that the first person to put a number forward, the other person gets to react to that number. Mm-hmm. But I do recognize that there are certain interview situations where they're not going to give you that latitude. So that's also something you have to recognize. So
what do? Pick your best salary or your highest, the most you've ever made?
You know, if they're going to ask for a historical number, you know, at least put yourself in the best position. You know, if they ask you if you're a bowler and that your best game has been, you know, 220, then you tell them you're a 220 bowler, right? Okay. So, you know, clearly you don't want to lie, but at the same time, you know, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Give them your best year. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about this offer dance and maximizing beyond the one question that I had for you? Is there something else that goes on? Yeah, I think it would be presumptuous, you know, of me to sit here and try to give a generality about how once you get to the point where you're in the dance, when you're actually negotiating for an offer, that you should do X, Y, or Z. Because given the competitive nature of the market, given the uniqueness of the skill set, given the urgency of the hiring manager, there's a number of, you know, this is a 5-dimensional matrix that it'd be impossible to give a generality. And so what I like to say in this case is it's the Kenny Rogers paradigm. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, right? And in that respect, you know, I think that you have to have a feel that you've developed that hopefully through the verbal and nonverbal signs that they have given you. You know, a lot of people focused on the signs that they're giving the hiring manager, but at the same time, trust me when I tell you that less than 20% of the hiring managers have received any kind of negotiation training. They're leaking signals as they go. And so when they do things like, for instance, use the word when to talk about when you work there. Instead of if you work here, when. If they leak that one word, in my mind, the moment I hear that, my price just went up. Right? Mm-hmm. And so if they start talking about things like relocation packages, if they start talking about things like what office you'll end up using, you know, they're beginning to signal. Those are all buying signals, and those are all need signals. So that at the same time, while we're trying to counsel interviewees not to show need, the hiring managers can't help themselves sometimes. If they get a good prospect, they begin to leak need at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so the other part of this advice is that the interviewees are are cognizant of the fact that they should be aware of those signals during the interview.
Do you think you need to have a walk-away point in a negotiation? I know that one of the classics is Getting to Yes by Urey and Fisher, and they say they call it something else, but you have to have a walk-away point. Do you think you can go into an interview without a walk-away point and still do all right, to be able to come out of it?
I try to signal in every interview I've ever done, and I look for this when I'm interviewing. I try to signal as an interviewee, I try to signal to the person who's interviewing me at some point, regardless of whether it even comes up, that I'm willing to walk away. I want this job. I don't need this job. So one of the things that I counsel people to do is to stand up and shake their hand. You always want to look people in the eye. You always want to shake their hand. You always want to not be timid, and again, try to compete as an equal, even though 80% of the information flow is going to be you responding to them. Fight for that 20%, as we talked about earlier. The other thing I want to say is that from a walk-away perspective, when I walk out of the room, even if we're not talking about packages and compensation or any of that, I stand up and shake their hand and say, hey, look, I've really enjoyed our interchange, and I wish you well regardless. And what I'm really saying there is, hey, I enjoyed our dialogue. It was a useful interchange. But I am happy to wish you well and walk off into the sunset if we can't get together on this, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to saying, well, when can I see you next, right? It's almost, like the high school cheerleader who asked the quarterback, when can we date next? It's the same thing.
Actually, I think this is a great place to stop. We're out of time. And this has been a great interchange, regardless of how it turns out. I want to thank you for being on the show.
Great,
I mean, it flew by. We had many more things to cover. Thank you for watching You're Hired. If you have any questions for us about this show or suggestions for future shows or questions about jobs and careers, feel free to email me at steve@bayareacareercoach.com. That's steve@bayareacareercoach.com. And do check out the website. You find the 12 keys to getting a great job. Sign up for the career newsletter there. Find out about the career coaching I do. Watch this episode if you want to see it again. And I also have the contact information for everybody who's ever been on the show. So if you want to contact Scott, and your website is maxjoboffer@verizon.net.
That's my email address.
For the email address, I'm sorry, your email address for your services, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you can check out Scott. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time on You're Hired. Thank you. Thanks for being on. When you said, it was so interesting because when you were saying...